제가 어렸을 때만 해도 해외 유학을 가거나 AFKN 같은 특정한 TV 채널이 없는 사람은 원어민이 영어를 발음하는 걸 들을 수가 없었습니다. 하지만 지금 영어를 공부하는 사람들은 유튜브나 넷플릭스에서 매일같이 몇 시간씩도 들을 수가 있기 때문에 똑같은 의지를 가지고 있다고 해도 우리 때 영어를 공부한 사람과 지금 영어를 배워가고 있는 사람의 수준은 차이가 날 수밖에 없어요. 이렇게 교육에 기술이 어마어마한 영향을 끼치기 때문에 실제로 공부를 잘하는 학생들을 보면은 새로운 기술이 도입될 때마다 그 기술을 빠르게 도입한 학생들이라는 생각이 듭니다. 얼마 전에 제가 GPT-4 출시에 관련된 세계 교육계 반응에 대한 컨텐츠에도 올렸듯이 AI가 처음 나왔을 때 학생들이 어디까지 AI를 사용해야 하는지에 대한 논란이 많았습니다. 너무 AI에 의존을 하게 돼서 학생들의 실력이 전반적으로 떨어질 것이다 라고 걱정을 하는 사람들도 있었고요. AI가 획기적으로 학업 부스터 능력을 해줄 거라고 믿는 사람도 있습니다. AI 시대에 이 기술을 어떻게 활용하면 학업 능력에 부스트를 달 수 있는지 살만 칸이라는 분을 초청해서 같이 얘기를 나눠볼까 하는데요. 살만 칸은 Brave New World라는 책의 저자기도 하고요. 세계 최대 비영리 인강 사이트인 칸 아카데미의 창시자기도 합니다. 살만 칸이 이번 책을 쓰게 된 계기는 GPT-4의 출시와 깊은 관계가 있다고 합니다. 이 GPT-4가 출시되기 전 샘 알트만을 비롯한 오픈 AI의 경영진들이 이렇게 막강한 AI가 출시되면 사람들이 AI가 인류에게 가져다 줄 위협에 대해서 많은 평론을 할 거라고 예상을 했다고 합니다. 그래서 출시 전에 이 AI가 인간을 위해서 이렇게 유용하게 사용될 수 있다는 걸 보여주기 위해서 비영리 교육재단으로 미국에서 명성을 내고 있던 살만 칸에게 접촉을 했다고 합니다. 그래서 두 조직이 협력을 해서 칸미고라는 AI를 개발을 해서 기능을 몸소 보면서 앞으로 학교, 시험, 수업 이런 것들이 어떻게 바뀔지에 대해서 총망라해서 쓴 책이 Brave New World라는 책이고요. 오늘 미래 교육 환경에서 성공할 수 있는 학생들은 어떤 방식으로 공부를 해야 하는지, 또 선생님, 교육자, 학부모들은 어떻게 사고방식을 바꿔야 하는지에 대해서 살만 칸과의 줌 인터뷰를 통해서 물어보기로 했습니다. I see that your life's work has been based upon this belief that technology can solve some of the most fundamental problems in today's education. What do you think is the single biggest problem in education today? And how do you think that Kamigo can be a part of the solution?
As you mentioned, I'm oftentimes known for, using technology. I always like to take a step back and remind folks that it's easy to get enamored with the technology, whether it's software or video or AI, but we should always try to remind ourselves what problem we're trying to solve. And there's a bunch of really interesting problems to solve in education. On one level, motivation is a huge issue. If a student is suitably motivated, even if they took a textbook from 100 years ago, they might be able to learn a lot. And if a student isn't motivated, it's hard even with the most cutting edge technology to learn. Now, I don't think that certain people are just born more motivated than other people. I think things happen in their life that makes them less motivated or not. And I think the thing that typically happens for a lot of students that you or I or a teacher might say, well, that student doesn't look that motivated, is they early on in their education, they start accumulating gaps. And as those gaps accumulate, they start struggling more and more in their learning to the point that even if they make the effort, they don't really get anything out of it. And so they just give up. If their family is well educated and has resources, the solution is usually to hire some type of a personal tutor. That tutor can go and fill in those gaps, hopefully even to help build the student's self-esteem, focus on what they need. And people have always known that this is the best thing to do. I always point out that Alexander the Great, his personal tutor was Aristotle. If you were a king, if you were a prince, if you were wealthy, you would have that type of support. But when we had mass public education for the last 200-300 years, we couldn't afford to give every student their own Aristotle. And so my hope has always been, what elements of technology could we use to start approximating some of what Aristotle would have done for Alexander the Great? As you mentioned, I started on this journey. I was originally in technology, then I was working in finance, but it all started on this journey in 2004 when I was tutoring my cousins who needed help. And it was the same issue. When I saw that they just had these gaps in their learning, I started writing software for them to give them practice. That was before I made any videos. Then I made videos to help them get these micro lessons when they needed it. They famously told me they liked me better on YouTube than in person. So I kept going. And now with AI, we're thinking, all right, AI can go that much further. It can help answer questions. It can help give hints. it can potentially help coach, give motivation, actually not just for the student, but also for teachers, help them have insights about where their students are, things that the teachers might be able to do to unlock the students. Now, with all of that said, I don't want anyone to think that I believe that you can just drop the technology and all of a sudden every student is going to learn 10 times more. But it's a long journey on how we can work with teachers, parents, students, and hopefully make the AI and the software better and better. So hopefully it does get close to what Alexander the Great had with Aristotle. I think a lot of the other fear for educators with AI is just frankly around the cheating issue. And I write a lot about this in my book. ChatGPT or other solutions like that, they can be used to cheat. And anyone who claims that they can detect it is lying to you. You can't detect it if the student is at all artful about how they use it. But at the same time, we also think we could use AI to be part of the writing process. We've launched something called Writing Coach, where the teacher assigns it, the AI works with the student does all the work, but AI gives feedback, so the student's more supported than normal. And then when the student submits the essay, the teacher doesn't just get the essay, they get the entire process of how the essay was constructed. And that not only gives the teacher more insights, but if the student goes to ChatGPT or gets their older sister to write the paper, then this will also say, hey, I don't know where this paragraph came from. It just looks like it appeared someplace. We didn't talk about this. So it can also help undermine not just AI cheating, but all forms of cheating. I think the AI can support teachers better. Teachers spend hours doing things like lesson plans, grading papers, writing progress reports. If we could take that time off of their plate, hopefully they can have more time for themselves and more time for their students for that person-to-person interaction. If students are struggling on a concept as opposed to just giving up and becoming demotivated like we talked about, this is an opportunity where they can get their questions answered, even if they're shy. Teachers can get that insight. If you go beyond 5 years, sky's the limit. I think we're going to start getting into a world where AIs aren't necessarily even going to be screen-based. And you don't have to, sit at a computer and type. You might just have a little device, a little, Alexa type device at every table, and it can facilitate a group discussion. Or maybe it's embodied in some way. For young kids, it could be a little teddy bear that they talk to and we work with. Who knows? Everyone puts their augmented reality glasses on, and you see your tutor, your AI tutor, and it's walking around. And so you don't have to decide whether you have to be in the real world or in the virtual world. The virtual world comes into the real world. I know it sounds like science fiction, but even what we now see with generative AI looked like complete science fiction 5 years ago. And there's no technical reason why this shouldn't happen. And if you just think about the problems we're trying to solve, the more that we can mix the virtual into the real world, the less you have this tension between screens and no screens, and you can get the best of both.
지금 우리가 알고 있는 강의실의 모습은 18세기의 가장 최첨단 테크놀로지이기 때문에 그렇게 만들어졌다는 거예요. 선생님이 가운데 서 있고 수많은 학생이 줄을 지어 앉아서 한 명의 선생님을 여러 학생이 들을 수 있도록 강의실이라는 기술을 응용함으로써 원래 1대1 또는 1대3 정도로 이루어지는 도제식 교육에서는 전 국민을 교육시킨다는 야망조차 가질 수 없는 시대에서 공교육을 통해서 모든 국민이 글을 읽을 줄 알고 셈을 셀 줄 아는 시대로 변화했다는 겁니다. 근데 우리나라에서 대체로 교육의 문제에 대해서 얘기를 하면 입시 또는 시험 위주 교육의 문제를 얘기하게 되는데, 살만카는 이것도 18세기의 기술이었던 강의실이라는 기술의 한계 때문에 만들어진 제도라고 얘기를 합니다. 선생님이 많은 학생들에게 강의로 수업을 하게 되면은 학생들과 1대1 인터랙션을 할 시간이 없기 때문에 학생들의 실제 수준을 파악하기가 매우 어려웠다는 거죠. 그렇기 때문에 모든 학생들한테 똑같은 사지선다형 질문을 주고 그 점수를 통해서 이 학생은 이 정도 대학에 갈 수 있는 실력이구나, 또는 다른 학생들은 낙제를 시켜서 이 학년을 한번 반복해야겠구나 라고 규격화된 절차를 만들 수밖에 없었다는 겁니다. 하지만 이제 AI의 도입으로 인간을 총체적으로 볼 수 있었던 시험 방식을 학교에서 도입할 수 있게 될 것이고, 그리고 시험을 잘 보는 학생들을 어떻게 교육시켜야 되는지도 다 바뀔 거라고 얘기합니다.
As you know, in South Korea, I guess in other parts of Asia as well, college entrance exams are sort of like be all end all, your reason for being for your entire life. Basically, that's what you work toward, and then you are judged by how well you did on your college entrance exam for the rest of your life. So in Korea, usually the preparations start when you're 3, 4, 5 years old. I saw a book that said your math score for the rest of your life is determined at age 2. And this was a pretty popular book. And because of this craze, this intense focus on college entrance exam, which is based on multiple choice format in Korea, schools are often accused of teaching just to the test at the detriment of all other skills. So because kids are drilling these multiple choice questions all day long, they don't have time for creativity or leadership skills or social skills or empathy training. So a lot of times educational experts in Korea look to the U.S. system and say, look, in the U.S., they look at extracurricular activities. They look at, if you're a sports captain, you get a leg up. So they look at a human being in a more holistic way. But the counter argument and why we didn't adapt the U.S. system was that we had the sentiment that wasn't really fair. Because if you are a sports captain and you get a leg up when you're getting into Ivy League, necessarily families who can afford to send their kids to sports centers will get an advantage. So we had this sense that U.S. system might be better at selecting more well-rounded individual, but those well-rounded individuals tend to be from the rich families. And you address this in your book as well. And you say that with AI, we might be able to design a new type of testing that can combine the advantages, the fairness of the multiple choice format that we have here in South Korea, and the holistic approach that we have in the US, and address some of the problems of both testing format. How do you see testing developing in the age of AI that we can address these problems?
There's some very simple incremental steps, and these are things that we're already building, and we can imagine where this could go in 5 or 10 years. The incremental steps. Okay, today you have multiple choice. Fine. But what if you can now also use AI to ask a student to explain their thinking? And then when you report the score, you could say, okay, this is what the student got. And also they were able to explain their reasoning, or I think they guessed this one because they weren't able to explain their reasoning, or they didn't understand the real concept, even though they were able to get the right answer. In a reading comprehension, before you see the multiple choice, why did the author use this word? You can have the student explain it in their own thinking before they do the multiple choice. And the reason why you probably have to have both right now is because the AI isn't quite good enough to be the only thing that's grading. And we have to also be careful about things like bias and inconsistencies on the AI. We have a sister nonprofit to Khan Academy called Schoolhouse.world. And over the coming year, you're going to see it's going to get closer and closer to Khan Academy. I'm also the CEO of Schoolhouse.world. And the idea behind it was, I've always imagined that the best practice isn't just for people to learn from the videos and the software, but to also learn from each other. We see that's at our Khan Lab School here in Mountain View. This is what we've always promoted as the best practice in classrooms. And I've always wanted to build it online where people anywhere in the world could tutor each other and learn from each other. And when the pandemic happened and even more people started using Khan Academy, I said, but wouldn't this be the right moment to really connect people? And so to Zoom's credit, they gave us a ton of Zoom licenses for free as a nonprofit. And we created a platform where people can get free live tutoring over Zoom. Then the question is, how do we know whether someone's qualified to tutor someone else? And we said, all right, we have assessments on Khan Academy, but how do we prove that it's them doing it? And so we created a mechanism where it records your face, it records your screen while you take an assessment on Khan Academy. You have to explain your reasoning out loud, and then it gets peer reviewed. And if everything looks good, you didn't cheat, then we say, okay, Unit 1 of Calculus, you're ready to begin your tutoring journey. Now, while all of that was happening, the University of Chicago, very selective university, and MIT and Brown and Caltech and a bunch of Yale selective universities in the United States said, look, this is pretty interesting to us because what you're doing is a way of certifying someone's knowledge without them having to go take a standardized test. And if they don't do well the first time, it's okay because Khan Academy keeps creating new questions for them. They could do it again the next day. This could be great for kids in parts of the world where they don't have access to standardized tests, Afghanistan or Iran, who knows. Could we use this for college admissions? As we said, sure. And they said, and what's even more interesting is not only if someone certifies that they know their calculus, but if they go off to become calculus tutors, and it's kind of like a Uber rating, you get feedback on how good of a tutor you are, and you get a rating. So if someone's done hundreds of sessions tutoring calculus and they're highly rated, that tells you so much. Clearly they know their material well, but they also know how to communicate. They also know how to empathize. They also know how to lead to our conversation if they're managing 5-6 students at the same time. That's the student that you want on your campus. Frankly, that's the student I want to hire at Khan Academy. And so we've been doing this for the past 4 years. And yes, students who are tutoring on Schoolhouse.world, and anyone can go and tutor or be tutored on Schoolhouse, those students are actually getting admitted to some of these universities at a much higher rate than the general population.
You might get a lot of tutoring applicants from South Korea now because I heard this from a friend of mine who lives in Irvine, California. And Irvine has become sort of a village of Korean people who want to send their kids to Ivy League schools. And he told me this funny story that Korean parents move to the US and they hear that playing an instrument might give you a leg up when getting into Ivy League school. So the first year, the Korean parents go to Irvine all their kids start playing piano or violin or some kind of orchestral instrument. And then they realized that when they auditioned for the Irvine School Orchestra, there were like 20 Korean kids coming in with a violin. And then they realized, okay, my kid is not going to get into an orchestra because there's too much competition. So next year, they all came in with a harp. So now there was a competition for harp. So now there's going to be a competition for curing for Schoolhouse Award.
My advice for all of these folks is, I don't think playing an instrument in and of itself, to your point, is actually any differentiating at all. If anyone wants a tip on getting into selective U.S. colleges, yes, you need to meet an academic bar, which, that's the first step. But beyond that, you have to have something authentic that just differentiates you. And if you're just another student who plays violin reasonably well, that's not why you're going to get into college. But if you started a cool podcast, but it's something that you wanted to do and it's uniquely yours. And the thing about schoolhouse.world, we had a student when I remember this was a student who found out from MIT because they wanted to apply to MIT. And they said, I came here because I wanted to get into MIT, but I can't fake it. You have to really love tutoring in order to be a great tutor. And I think that's why these universities really appreciate it, because it's a lot harder to do it halfway. But my advice for folks is, find what you're passionate about. That is what many of these hyper-selective colleges really care about, as opposed to checkboxing. And if you're doing what 100 other folks are doing, especially if they're of a similar ethnicity and similar city, it's not going to help at all. So if you fast forward 5 or 10 years, you can imagine an AI that interviews you, that asks you to do the types of problem solving or simulations that you might do if you're going and interviewing to be an executive at a company, if you're interviewing to go becoming a management consultant or work as a senior engineer at Google. Those types of questions, how many quarters can fit into a 747? And they don't care that you get the right answer. They care that you can think it through and that you're asking the right questions. Or ask you questions about, do you think tariffs are going to be good or bad for the U.S. economy? And then have a conversation with you. Things like this have always been the gold standard, but they've always been very expensive, very resource intensive, and very inconsistent. When you go get a job interview, depending on that person's mood, depending on their first impression of you, that conversation can go in a million different directions. There's a hope that an AI could be much more consistent about it. Because to your point, if they're hiring university grads from top universities in Korea, they'll be worried whether these students have these other soft skills, let's say. And if they're hiring from Harvard or Stanford, they're going to be worried, well, did this kid get into Harvard or Stanford because they are, super smart? Or did they get into Harvard or Stanford because their father donated a building, or because they're, a famous actor? The school needed a tuba player and this kid just happened to play tuba that year, but they're not necessarily the skills we need. And actually, I would love a way that it's not dependent on where you go to school, that even if you didn't go to Harvard or Stanford, or even if you didn't go to the top school in Korea, but now you're 25, 30 years old, you can still prove that you're just as capable or more capable than any of those students.
다음은 제가 우리 채널에서 가장 많이 받는 질문을 미국 최고의 인간 구루한테 여러분을 대신해서 물어봤습니다. 바로 AI 번역기의 시대, 영어를 공부할 필요가 있느냐라는 질문입니다.
So one question I get a lot on my channel, because I do a lot of bilingual interviews, is when AI translation becomes fully functional, do we still have to study English? So because you're in the States, I'm going to give you a little context. Learning English is the single most stressful and time-consuming thing a Korean person has to do in his or her lifetime. Because Korea is a small, open economy that's dependent on foreign investment and import and export, somebody who speaks English has a huge advantage compared to somebody who doesn't. There's a competition for parents to get their kids into a kindergarten or daycare center where they might have an English-speaking tutor. They might try to get a foreign green card or citizenship so they can send their kids to international school where the curriculum is in English. So because of all this context, amount of money and time that people spend on mastering English, there has been lamentations even 20 years ago that if we didn't have to spend this much time learning English, we could use that time to build leadership, to train creativity, give kids more time for physical activity. But now, kids are sitting at home, spending 2-3 hours a day, memorizing tens of thousands of English words, memorizing grammatical rules, and most of them never reach fluency anyways. Do you think in the age of AI live translation, somebody with English skills will have the same access to knowledge and opportunities as somebody who doesn't?
It's a great question. Two things. I recently met a gentleman who speaks I think 12 or 15 languages. And he pointed out to me that the reason why he learned these languages, it's not for communication. And he pointed out AI is going to be able to do that or already can do that in many cases. He does it more for connection. That if you can speak someone's language, you connect to them and you understand their culture at a much deeper level. So I do think that English has turned into some of this, the global language of commerce and academia and all of this. It will, whether you're in Korea, whether you're in India, whether you're in France, you're going to have an advantage if you learn English. Of course, you'll be able to communicate with anyone, to your point, because of AI. But if you really want to connect at a business level, form of partnership, being able to speak each other's language in some way, shape, or form is going to give you an advantage. We actually have a project. One of our funders just gave us a project on Khan Academy Kids, which is our early learning app, to help young kids with early English acquisition, because it's based on the same idea. If you're in Africa, if you're in Korea, if you're in India, if you can start to have functional English from a young age, your economic empowerment goes through the roof. And once again, I don't think it's just because you're going to be able to communicate. AI will be able to do that, but it's because you'll be able to understand a culture better. You'll connect with more people more directly.
I brought up English as an example of what you call in your book the confounding paradox. Let's say a student wants to be a screenwriter and then AI can write screenplay better than you. So what motivations do you have anymore to learn how to write screenplays, even if AI can help you write the screenplay? And your solution to this in your book was that reading, writing, and arithmetic are more important than ever. On top of that, a solid appreciation and understanding of history or science, law, and finance would round out someone well. And to me, it sounds like the old solution, rather than, the answer that people are burning to get in the age of AI.
Yeah, and it is, intentionally, it has a traditionalist aspect to it. And I mentioned this in the book. If we look at other technological transformations where similar arguments, when the calculator came out, people said students don't need to learn arithmetic anymore. It turns out that the students who did learn arithmetic actually ended up using tools like calculators and computers more and were able to use it to greater effect. Similarly, when the internet and web search came out, a lot of people argued, well, students don't have to know anything anymore. They just have to Google it. Well, it turns out that the people who have content knowledge, are they more likely to be able to get a job that's a knowledge job where things like search are even useful, but they tend to be much more sophisticated at leveraging things like search. And I see that now already with generative AI. People who know something about a domain, they're much more thoughtful and they get a lot more out of that AI. Another way to think about it, AI, we know, already operates at the 80th or 90th percentile in certain tasks, like coding, etc. And if you can't write as well as the AI or nowhere close to the AI, there's no way that you are going to be able to amplify your writing at a really world-class level. Yes, it might help you write an email, with this or that, but if you really want to write, you need to be able to keep up with that AI. I also think the human element, a lot of what we've talked about, is also going to gain even more importance. I gave the example of people go to restaurants, not because it's the most efficient way to get food or even the most efficient way to get good food, but because they like that person-to-person experience. There's people who've tried to make restaurants where they automate the waiter and they automate ordering. Those aren't the best restaurants. People don't like that. They want to go to a restaurant. No one wants to go to an empty restaurant. They want to see other people. They want to talk to their hosts, etc. I would add to that list of content knowledge that you just mentioned, that I mentioned in the book, also with things like communication skills, sense of humor, creativity, interpersonal skills. And once again, one of the exciting things about AI here is those things were very hard to assess in the past. There's no standardized test that can tell you how funny you are. I think that we will get into a world where you could start to have simulation-based AI assessments. It won't do everything, but it can start to get into a little bit of your interpersonal skills, your creativity, how well you can do some problem solving. So I think we'll have a broader aperture, but some of those traditional skills are still really important.
전에 조핑턴 포스트 GPT-4 리액션 비디오에서도 올렸던 것처럼 GPT-4가 나왔을 때 대부분의 교육자들과 학부모들은 굉장히 겁을 냈었어요. 그 이유가 제가 생각할 때 SNS 시대에 청소년들의 정신건강이라든지 교육관계에 악영향을 끼치는 걸 많이 봤기 때문에 SNS보다 훨씬 더 강력한 테크놀로지인 AI가 나왔을 때 악영향에 대해서 걱정을 많이 했던 것 같습니다. 이 AI가 어떻게 SNS 시대의 청소년 건강 문제에 한 해결책이 될 수 있다고 생각하는지 살만 칸에게 물어봤습니다.
Last year, we had Dr. Jonathan Haidt of New York University on our channel. He wrote the book, The Anxious Generation, and he's been very vocal about getting technology out of our kids' schools because of the detrimental effect it has on their mental health and because they are looking at their screens and not necessarily interacting with other students or building teamwork. So when GPT-4 came out, and because AI technology is so much more powerful than social media, I think a lot of parents and educators were worried. And your book was one of the first books I read where somebody takes a very positive stance on technology in education. So you seem to believe, if I read your book correctly, that AI not only will not exacerbate the problems of the social media age, you think it could actually be a part of the solution. How do you see that working out?
Yeah, and it all depends on how we use it. And I've spoken to Jonathan a lot. We agree on almost everything. We both think that things like social media, you have to be very careful no matter what age you are, but especially if you're young. These algorithms on social media, they're optimized to just keep you scrolling, keep you watching. And unfortunately, I don't think anyone at Instagram or YouTube intended it this way, but it's oftentimes feeding you things that are polarizing, things that get you dejected, seeing pictures of the party that you weren't invited to. Everyone else's life looks better than yours. And there's real evidence, as Jonathan would point out, that it's causing real mental distress and a lot of problems for a lot of people, not just young people. I think AI, it could go either way. I suspect it's probably going to go in both directions. I suspect there are going to be AI solutions where the objective function is just going to be, how do we addict someone as much as possible in any way that we can? And that's going to be dangerous. But even pre-AI, if a student was spending time on a device writing a paper, no one would say go off of the computer and go write on a typewriter. Or if a student was editing video, or if a student is designing something, these would all be, I think, constructive uses. Now, even there, you would still say, make sure you have real friends, you're going and visiting them, make sure that you're going outside, you're getting exercise. Same thing is true even before the internet. I remember my sister growing up, she would read, if you let her, she would read 16 hours a day. Most parents love if their kids read, but if your kid is reading 16 hours a day, you say, put the book down, go outside, make sure you go visit with friends, etc. So I think everything has to be done in moderation, where you can have an AI on your side that's observing what you're doing and is aligned with your values, where it says, look, you said you wanted to be more mindful. You said that you wanted more time outside. You said you wanted to be more productive, but it looks like you spent the last 10 minutes on TikTok. Maybe you want to stop that, and then you want to go meditate or call your mother up or call up a friend. Or I see that you're spending a lot of time on Discord chatting with your friends. Why don't you want to see if they can go meet up someplace as opposed to just chatting all night? I think our students are going to get some form of AI literacy one way or the other. In many cases, young people are more literate than the students are. And we see that with the internet. They all know how to use the internet. Now, what we worry about the internet and what we worry about social media is they all know how to use it. They're all using it more than any of us. But can they gauge whether a fact is real or not real? Can they tell when they're being manipulated, when they're falling into a rabbit hole on YouTube and they're becoming polarized or triggered or depressed? Do they have that metacognition? And so I think with AI, we should also do that. Okay, how do you know when something is a hallucination or not? How do you know if you are being played? I'm sure people are going to create AIs that are trying to sell you things, that are trying to change your point of view. Can you defend yourself against that type of thing? But I also think, and this is something I stress a lot in the book, all technology amplifies human intent. We know bad folks, bad actors are going to amplify their bad intent. They're going to use AI. They already are, for fraud, for deepfakes, for controlling people, for manipulating people. So good people, which I think most people are fundamentally good, if we don't equip ourselves also with those tools and lean in, then we're going to be ceding this very powerful technology to bad actors. And then it will be dystopian. So our only way of having a utopian world, or closer to utopian, or at least not dystopian, is if good people understand these tools, they understand the risks, but that doesn't make them afraid to lean in and make it do powerful things and amplify their positive intent.
결국 이 인터뷰에서 제 마음속에 가장 깊이 만든 내용은 All technology amplifies intent라는 문장이에요. 인간의 의도를 증폭시키는 것이 기술이다. 다시 말하면은 내가 많은 학생들한테 교육의 기회를 제공하겠다라는 선량한 의도를 가지고 기술을 활용하면은 기술은 그거를 그만큼 더 쉽게 해주고, 내가 예를 들어서 많은 사람들을 중독시키고 화나게 만들고 극단화시키겠다라는 목적을 가지고 테크놀로지를 쓰면 그런 나쁜 의도도 증폭될 수 있다는 거죠. 그렇기 때문에 새로운 기술이 나왔을 때 이 기술이 어떻게 나쁘게 사용될 수 있고 좋게 사용될 수 있는지를 정확하게 가르치고 어렸을 때부터 자기를 발전시키는 건설적인 방식으로 쓰도록 만들어서 결국 사회 안에서 이 AI 테크놀로지를 건설적으로 쓰는 사람의 숫자가 파괴적으로 쓰는 사람의 숫자를 압도하게 만들어야만 우리가 미래에 건강한 AI 시대를 맞을 수 있다라는 노심초사에서 이 책을 썼다고 얘기합니다. 또 예를 들어서 우리나라처럼 입시 위주로 사람을 뽑는 나라와 미국처럼 스포츠 주장을 했다든지 봉사활동을 하는 사람을 뽑는 나라도 굉장히 다른 유형의 사람들이 대학에 들어가게 돼요. 다시 말하면 사람을 평가하는 기술, 어세스먼트 테크놀로지라고 쌀만칸이 불리는 기술이 바뀌면 이 사회 안에서 성공하는 공식도 바뀐다고 할 수 있기 때문에 앞으로 AI 시대에는 어떤 테스트가 만들어질지, 그리고 그런 테스트를 대비하기 위해서는 왜 더 기초에 충실하고 인성교육이 중요한지에 대해서도 들어볼 수 있는 시간이었습니다. 대략 40분 정도 되는 쌀만칸과의 풀 인터뷰는 이 탐구루루 VIP 존에 올라가 있으니까 VIP 멤버십을 가입하시면 볼 수 있고요. 오늘 조승현의 탐구생활은 여기서 마무리하겠습니다. 다음에는 더 재밌는 역사 문화 이야기로 찾아뵙겠습니다. 안녕히 계십시오.